So today I just wanted us to have a discussion on the history of the education development in Zambia. I did a bit of research, and as usual, I'm a lover of summary. I would read a book of 100 pages and I would summarize the book in one page and just explain everything to you. Yeah, so I did a bit of summary. I looked at the contributions that were made towards Zambia's education, starting with Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, going to Frederick Chiluba, Levi Mwanawasa, Rupia Banda, Michael Sata, Edgar Lungu, Hakainde Hichilema, and we're also going to look at some of the constraints that we might face as a result of some of the things that have been introduced in our education sector. And towards the end, I'm just going to talk about the vision that Brian Munduwile has in terms of improving the education sector in Zambia and what his plans are for our education sector. Very, very important piece of work that I have put together. I know it's not perfect, so if you have any contributions, please just raise up your hand or say something. I hope I'll not be able to miss you in the comment section, or make a request and then I'll be able to add you. So we are going to start from Dr. Kenneth Kaunda. Am I audible enough? Are you able to hear me clearly? Just give me a thumbs up or write in the comment section. Yes, we can hear you clearly. Yeah. Oh, Kennedy says he's watching me from Choma, Zambia. You're welcome, darling. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you. Watching you from Mazabuka. I love the way you analyze issues. Emmanuel, thank you so much. I really appreciate. Yeah, okay, thank you. It looks like I'm audible. People are able to hear me. So we'll start with Dr. Kenneth Kaunda. This was during the UNIP era. So we'll look at it from 1964 until 1991, when Kenneth Kaunda was in power. I did break it down also to the names of ministers that were in these governments, but I just thought it would be too much information. So just for now, I will just do the development summary of each government towards the education sector. So for Kenneth Kaunda, from 1964 to 1991, he made education a national priority after independence. He expanded the primary and secondary education across the country. Yeah. So he also introduced a free or heavy subsidized education. He established new teacher training colleges and expanded universities, including the University of Zambia in 1966. Yeah. Oh, it's good that I have somebody from UNZA, and I'm just reading something about UNZA. So as you can see, during the Kaunda time, Kaunda made sure that he had established new teacher training colleges and also expanded the University of Zambia by 1966. Yeah. He also focused on education for development to promote national unity and economic growth. So during 1964 to 1991, this is what Kaunda and his government had focused on, and these were, the contributions that they made in the education sector. So Kaunda left power, and then we had Frederick Chiluba. So Frederick Chiluba ran his term from 1991 until 2002. So during Frederick Chiluba's time, he introduced the education reforms, encouraging private schools and community schools. If you remember very well, during the Chiluba time, that's when there was a mushrooming of private schools. A lot of private schools came up. We had community schools that had come in and stuff. The education sector did improve. He gave us, a different face to our education system. Those that had money were able to take their children to private schools. Yeah. So he faced funding challenges due to economic reforms, and I think this actually affected the budget that was meant for the education sector, I think, during Chiluba's time. However, he increased the access to basic education despite resources constraints. He implemented the 1996 National Policy on Education Educating Our Future, which guided education reforms. I think I remember this policy, Educating Our Future. If you followed this very well, if you were interested in the education system in Zambia, yeah, I remember the time the Educating Our Future policy came about. We had books and flyers and things like that, really talking about it during the Chiluba time. So that was Chiluba's contribution with his government towards the development of education in Zambia. And then we had Levi Mwanawasa, who ran his term from 2002 until 2008. Yeah. So for Levi Mwanawasa, he increased investment in school infrastructure, he expanded teacher recruitment, he improved access to primary education, and supported programs aimed at achieving universal primary education under global development goals. So primary education, I think, was made free from the Levi Mwanawasa era. So this is where now we're seeing things changing in terms of, free education and stuff. So this is where we had now primary education was free during Levi Mwanawasa time. And I remember my siblings were in primary school during this era, and they enjoyed part of the free primary education. Yeah. And then moving on, we have Rupiah Banda. So Rupiah Banda came in between 2008 to 2011, and he continued the expansion of schools and classrooms. He improved the learning materials and teacher training. He also strengthened the technical and vocational education initiatives. And then it was during now Rupiah Banda's time that we had Professor Lungwangwa. So Professor Lungwangwa came in and adopted the CSTL model. So the CSTL model, this is a framework that was designed by the SADC Secretariat for all SADC countries. Yeah. So it was in 2008 under Professor Lungwangwa that Zambia actually signed up to this framework, saying that they would turn their schools into inclusive centers of care and support for teaching and learning. Yeah. So now this is where now issues of the feeding program started coming into schools. This is when healthcare support started coming into schools, psychosocial support, safety and protection, nutrition, inclusive education, as well as community and family involvement. So these are like the elements of care and support for teaching and learning. This was a framework that was designed by the SADC Secretariat for all SADC countries, and ministers at that time were required to sign and say that they will implement the framework in their countries, and there were actually indicators that were put in place to make sure that these elements are being implemented in our schools, and the policies that are being developed are actually speaking to the policies that were developed were actually speaking to the elements or the components of the CSTL, which was the care and support for teaching and learning framework. So this was adopted in 2008, and then by 2009, Zambia started implementing the CSTL model. Oli, you can come in, mommy. It's fine. Yeah. So this model, I said it was created by the SADC Secretariat in conjunction with an organization known as MIT Africa, UNESCO, as well as UNICEF. So UNICEF played a very big role in designing this framework. UNESCO put in a lot of input, MIT Africa, as well as the SADC Secretariat. So these four big organizations actually came together and developed this framework, which was adopted in Zambia. Like I said, within this framework, it had components, and the components that were in this framework were health support, psychosocial support, safety and protection, nutrition. This is where the feeding program came in schools, inclusive education. Inclusive education, this is where they also looked at children with different disabilities. How can we include children with disabilities into our already existing education systems? Yeah, do we isolate them? Do they learn together with other children? And the final answer was these children need to be incorporated in our already existing education system. They should not be isolated at all. Yeah, so it called for inclusive education as well as involvement of community and family. So this is where they involved the community into running the schools. We had PTA meetings where parents and community members were a part of, and they would get their input as to how they could improve the education sector, and also asking the community what it is that they could do, you know, for some of these schools. As we go on, I'm going to share a case study in Kaoma of how the community got involved in terms of improving the education, improving the schools within their districts. Yeah. So we move on to Michael Sata. Are we together, guys? Are you following? Yeah. Are you following, or am I too fast? Am I saying things that are not making sense? Somebody to give me a heads up and say we're following, Tenji. Yeah. Are we together? Is it making sense? Oops. All right. Okay, thank you very much. So we move on to Michael Sata. So Michael Sata came in 2011 until 2014. This is also where we saw like a very big improvement in the education system in Zambia. So Michael Sata built additional secondary schools. He built primary schools, especially in the rural areas of Zambia. This was like the breakthrough of, you know, the development of the education system in Zambia. This is where we saw more schools being built. This is where we saw, you know, proper structures being built in the rural areas. And Michael Sata was only in power from 2011 to 2014, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. Yeah, about 3 years that Michael Sata was in power. But look at the many things that he did in the 3 years that he was in power. We're not talking about 4 years. We're not talking about 5 years. We're talking about the 3 years Michael Sata was in power. The other day, I was listening to Wakambwili during one of the rallies. And actually, I should get those statistics. If there's anyone that knows, I'll be very happy for you to just give me the actual numbers. He actually mentioned how many primary and secondary schools and hospitals were built during the Michael Sata era. Yeah? So many primary and secondary schools were built during the Michael Sata era. He recruited thousands of teachers. Yeah, for the first time we saw like a huge number of teachers being recruited at once. He increased access to education in underdeserved communities. Michael Sata reached out to the underdeserved communities in Zambia, yeah, and increased access to education. He promoted technical and skill-based education. So you see how the face of education began to change from the era of Rupiah Banda to Michael Sata. There was actually huge improvement and development in the education system. This is where a lot of foundations were laid for most of the things that we are seeing today. So I'm going to ask a question: who is actually the real Bali for all this development that we are seeing today in the education system? After this presentation, you will be able to tell me who the real Bali is for the development of our education system in Zambia. So we come to Edgar Chagwalungu from 2015 to 2021. Edgar Chagwalungu introduced the curriculum reforms emphasizing practical skills and entrepreneurship. This is where we saw entrepreneurship coming into the schools. He said it has to be taught to children, you know, from school. let children get to know about entrepreneurship if we're looking at Zambia to be a developed country. He introduced that in our education system. He expanded secondary schools infrastructure. He also came in and still continued with the vision of Michael Sata of building more secondary schools in the country. He did face some disruption during the COVID-19 pandemic, leading to school closures and remote learning initiatives. If you remember, we had the COVID-19, and it was during this era that schools were closed and children stayed home for quite a long time without returning to school. We had faced this challenge during the Edgar Chagwa Lungu's time. He continued investment in higher education as well as vocational training. During Edgar Lungu's time, we had Mr. David Mabumba, who was minister at that time. And Mr. David, now, this is the minister that actually drove now the CSTL framework into the Ministry of Education. An office was opened at the Ministry of Education for the SADC Secretariat, and they actually ran an independent project. This was like a trial project to try and see how best CSTL can fit into the already existing education system in Zambia. They employed somebody who was based at Ministry of Education, who was a master trainer, and there was a budget that was allocated to these activities, and there was about 9 to 10 schools that were a pilot project. So in those 9 schools, they tried out different activities surrounding health support, activities surrounding psychosocial support. Teachers were being trained on how to carry out psychosocial support to their learners in schools. Not only career guidance teachers were trained, but also other teachers like mathematics teachers, English teachers. How are you able to notice that a child is withdrawing, or there's something that is happening to a child that you're teaching? Even if you're a mathematics teacher, you need to have those psychosocial skills. And all these teachers in the 9 schools were actually trained and given skills on psychosocial counseling and on how best they could, respond to the different challenges and problems that the children were facing in the schools. It was a pilot project that was done in about 9 schools, I think, in Zambia across. There was some schools in Kaoma, there was some schools in Kabwe, in Kapiri, in Rufunsa, as well as Chongwe. Yeah, they had picked some schools where these programs were running, and this whole thing, at the end of the day, there was an evaluation that was done and recommendations sent back to the Ministry of Education, hoping that they would expand this. Yeah, so I'm coming to that. Now, when I talk about the expansion of CSTL, then you will see how the feeding program was birthed and how it came about. Yes, when Brian Munduila said it was actually during David's time, David Mambona's time, Mabomba, is that how you pronounce his name? Time that the feeding program actually started, I would agree with him, because this is where we actually saw a visible touch. Things really happening, and those indicators that we're actually tracing and following the progress of how some of these programs were happening in schools. So it was just not a standalone as a nutrition program, but it had other programs that were happening in the schools, and all these programs were being evaluated together at the end of the day. So Mr. David made a huge contribution to our Zambia's education. It is sad that today most people want to remember him for other things, but I would want to look at the positive side and the positive things that he did for our nation. Yeah, he improved our education system. He adopted frameworks and policies that actually brought about development in the education system in Zambia. Yeah, so policies were developed, and during Mr. Mabumba's time, this is where the CSTO framework now was adopted and included in their standards policy. So if you look at the standards policy for Ministry of Education between 2018 and 2020, you will actually find the CSTL framework in their standard policy. This was brought about by Mr. David, and he made sure that every school should follow the way that they had suggested on how best to carry out these different components of care and support for teaching and learning. And the goal was to turn every school into an inclusive center of care and support for teaching and learning. So we move on to Hakainde Hichilema, who came in between 2021 until present. This is what he did in 4 years. He reintroduced free education in public and primary schools. He recruited thousands of teachers to reduce the shortages of teachers. He increased the education funding in the national budget. He expanded access to early childhood education, and he promoted digital learning. So he also has made a contribution to the Zambian teaching system. However, there's some challenges that we see in some of the things that he has done. In as much as they're really good approaches, they're really good policies, but then we're looking at our education system in Zambia currently and where we are going. So we're looking at the issue of one of the challenges that we are facing or will even be facing in the future as a result of some of these policies that have been created by the UPND government are one, the overcrowdedness of classrooms. Yeah. So the abolishment of tuition fee has led to a sharp increment in enrollment. In as much as it is a good idea that we have free education, the enrollment has increased rapidly to a point that the Ministry of Education is unable to control. The Ministry of Education has no control whatsoever at the moment because every child can get into school, which is good, but then classes are getting crowded. So in primary school, if you have 150 kids, this is October when the sun is there, yeah, with one teacher controlling 150 children. How are you going to respond to the children? How are you going to mark their books? If they're doing 4 subjects in a day, it means a teacher has to mark 400 books. Is that visible? You do an exercise in English. Normally what happens, primary school, minimum maybe subjects that you have in a day are 4 subjects. In a day, 5 maybe. And then each subject will have an exercise. So you do mathematics, there's an exercise in mathematics. And if there's 150 children in that class, it means the teacher has to mark 150 books. When she introduces an English lesson, after the English lesson, she gives them an exercise. It means she has to mark again 150 books, making it 300 books that she's marked in 2 lessons. If she does 3 lessons, brings up science, if there's an exercise in science, it means you have 450 books that she has marked in a day. Do you think that is practical? And when you look at the time that is given to them in school, I can't remember, I don't know what the hours are now, because I remember there used to be sessions from 10 hours. Is it from 7:30 to 12 o'clock or something? I can't remember the hours properly. Is it 5 hours in school or something? So within 5 hours, you're expecting a teacher to mark 450 books. Is that visible? Is that something that's happening? That is not quality education. So we'll be having our kids go into school and still come back blank. It will be very hard for a teacher to really concentrate and give tailor-made help to every child. She'll just be doing it just to you know, so that I should mark the register that I've taught them science, I've taught them English, I've taught them social studies. But taking that time to really understand and guide learners and pupils, that will not be there. At the end of the day, what are we producing? What sort of pupils are we producing at the end of the day? There's a show that I've been following. There's a boy that went to Ghana, I think from Zambia. And this guy has represented us so well, this young man. And that is the standard now that the world has of Zambia's education. Why? Because this young man learned in the era where teachers actually had time with him. They were able to coach him. You know, he's speaking very good English. He's in grade 12. He's in grade 11 or 12, I don't know, at David Kaunda. He speaks so well, like a person that is in university. But do you think that would be the standard for every child in Zambia if they start going through this, you know, this new era of teaching where the classes are crowded and teachers are not paying attention to individual pupils? Do you think we're going to produce such cream? No, we won't. And if our pupils are given an opportunity to go and present us on platforms other than Zambia, it would be very embarrassing, because we will not be backing them enough for them to go out there and show people who we are. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Yeah, I think I'm talking too much, and I've not been able to sit and really read some of the comments, but I'm coming back to the comments. I just wanted us to look at some of the challenges that we are going to face, or rather are facing, due to some of the new policies that have been introduced within the Ministry of Education. If you're joining me, we're just talking about the different contributions that the different governments from the time of Kaunda, their contribution towards the education system in Zambia. This is what we're talking about. Right now, we're looking at the constraints, or rather the challenges that we're facing. We've talked about overcrowded classrooms. We're still facing teacher shortages. In as much as teachers have been recruited, the demand has grown even faster because of the increased enrollment. So is the government ready for this financially? Are we ready? So this is actually affecting schools, particularly in rural areas, where they're actually facing, this shortage of qualified teachers. We're still dealing with insufficient infrastructure. Many schools lack classrooms, desks, laboratories, libraries, and toilets. Schools in Zambia don't really have well-equipped laboratories, and these are things that also the government would have looked into. I know most of the schools, this is a challenge, having laboratories as well as libraries. We could have space for libraries, but our books are outdated. We do not have current books. We do not have books that we really need that would help us with our current curriculums. Mostly you just find books from the old ancient, times and stuff stocked up in the libraries, and nobody even knows what they are and where they are from and the like. We just found them there and they've been there, We're also foreseeing pressure on government finances. So free education requires continuous government funding for teachers' salaries, teaching materials, school grants, as well as infrastructure. Maintaining this level of funding over a long term remains a challenge, especially during periods of economic difficulties. So we should be asking ourselves questions. What plans do we have in place when we start to face economic difficulties with the different policies that we have introduced? Sorry, my laptop is just running out of charge. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so in the future, if we start to face economic difficulties, we cannot say we'll not face economic difficulties. We know how it's been in Zambia. Yeah, we would face economic difficulties. So how do we plan to maintain, the free education? How do we plan to maintain the feeding programs if the current government at the moment cannot sustain the provision of fertilizer to its farmers? Do you think even the feeding program is very sustainable at the moment with what is happening? Yeah. And then when we look at things like infrastructure in the schools, the kitchens, we're looking at nutrition, we're looking at safety. Are all these things put in place? This food that is being cooked for the pupils, what safety measures are there? Are these people trained, in food and food safety and whatever? There's a certain training that you have to do, when you are cooking food for large numbers. Yeah. Are we ready in times of outbreaks of cholera? What plans do we have in place and all those things? These are questions that we need to be asking ourselves. These are things that we need to put on the table. We need to prepare ourselves for such things. We don't have to wait for them to happen in order for us to start thinking of solutions, but we need to have a plan in place. So we're looking at challenges of learning materials due to the increased enrollment. There's been a shortage of learning materials in schools. As a result, several pupils may not have a share of a single textbook. Quality education has been compromised. While access has improved, some education experts argue that quality has not kept pace. Large classroom size and limited resources can affect learners' performance, assessment, and teacher effectiveness. Now, coming to the bread, or rather the butter of my presentation, I want us to look at what Brian Mundubile is suggesting for our education sector in Zambia. What him and his team are actually proposing and are saying, this is what we are going to do if you elect us into power. This is how we plan to improve our education sector. So Brian Mundubile is saying they will continue with a free education policy. Of course, they're going to look at all the things that I've mentioned into consideration. Yeah? They will provide quality education to pupils, and this includes providing books as well as uniform to students. They will upgrade the qualifying teachers. He talked about most of our teachers went in with maybe diplomas and they've improved themselves. They're now degree holders and master's degree holders, but they're still at the same level and they're not changing. And he's saying once he's elected into power, they will sit down and look at the qualifying teachers and promote them and put them in the places where they're supposed to be. So that is motivating for teachers. He's also talking about building houses for teachers. So in as much as we are deploying teachers into schools, we're just taking them to schools and we're saying head teachers should take care of the accommodation for the teachers. Try and find a house, you know, within the school and the like for these teachers. I know I worked at a certain school at a certain time, and we received new teachers, and usually these teachers would go and they would be placed in other houses with other teachers whilst they're trying to look for accommodation for them. It was really a challenge. Others had families and they had to leave their families back home and wait until they get accommodation. It was really a big challenge. But Mundubile is saying once elected into power, he will make sure that the project for teachers' houses is going to start and teachers will live in decent homes. He talked about increasing teacher salaries. He will employ more teachers to reduce the burden of overcrowded classes. He will still continue with the teacher recruitment. He said he has not stopped. However, he has stopped the database way of recruitment. Yeah? He's also talked about the debt swap for burdened teachers with loans. So we're not saying, oh, every teacher should go ahead and get a loan and your loan will be taken over by the government. No. But obviously there will be a criteria that will be in place. Probably definitely be a way they are going to do this. And it's not like today you get a loan, you expect the government to pay it. When the government pays it for you, tomorrow you get another loan and things like that, and the government pays it for you. No, that's not how it's going to happen. There will definitely be a system in place, and people should not worry about that. I saw that was a comment that was coming from most people saying, so it's going to make people lazy and they'll continue borrowing and borrowing, expecting the government to pay. No, that's not going to happen. There's actually a proper system that will be put in place. So Godfrey Sikazwe is saying the first thing is they enrolled the children in class. Of course, having 150 children in class is unacceptable. However, if all these children who were in class could have grown uneducated, it is an opportunity for any government to come and improve on the efforts made, which is very true. I do agree with you. Whatever efforts have been done, we're not saying they're bad efforts, they're bad policies, or they are bad things that they've implemented. There are good things that have been implemented. However, we are saying how best are we going to make sure that these things are are well maintained and carried forward in a way that there'll be sustainability of these projects or programs happening in the schools, so that we do not also disturb the children. Yeah. So he's saying now from 2008, why was the feeding program not implemented? So I think the feeding program was implemented in stages. So there was a pilot project that was done. And then after the pilot project, there were recommendations that were made to the Ministry of Education. And from there, of course, it takes time for certain things to happen. It started slowly. Do you know that there are some schools in Zambia that actually started the feeding program on their own? There's a certain primary school in Kaoma. It's just right there in the city, in town, where parents would actually bring in medals of maize, and they would make mealie meal out of it, and they would bring beans, and the parents themselves came up with a rota on going to cook at the school. So they would cook for their pupils in school, and food was provided by the parents of the children. And this program really worked so well for this primary school. So you can see that some of these initiatives were happening in some schools where head teachers were just running the feeding programs on their own. Feeding programs were happening in some schools, especially in rural schools, but they all did it their own way. So what has happened now is that there's a standard of doing it. You know, there's a budget now that has gone in place to support the feeding programs. We do have schools that were actually growing their own maize. Yeah, they were growing their own maize. They have their own poultry farms. We have schools that have been running fish ponds and then selling the fish to the public. The monies that they generate, they would use it, you know, to buy food and feed the pupils in schools. Different initiatives were going on. It's just that now it's been standardized, and there's a budget that has been allocated to supporting the feeding program. Yeah, this is why now we all know about it, and it's a song for the day. Good, yes, it's a good thing that has happened, but at the end of the day, we need to sit down and evaluate and see how best we can continue such programs in school so that we do not disturb our learners. So somebody is asking to say, does it mean that teachers who are working are not qualified? No, we do have qualified teachers. If you remember very well, like most of our primary school teachers were diploma holders and stuff. But today, if you go in most of these schools, you'd find that the teachers have upgraded themselves. They've gotten degrees and master's degrees. Yeah, others would go in and start teaching with only their diplomas, you know, in the schools. But with time, they have improved themselves. So we're not saying unqualified teachers were employed. No. So we're just using the word qualified teachers to emphasize on the fact that the teachers that will be enrolled in the schools will be qualified teachers. Not necessarily that the teachers are not qualified. No. So he's saying now the promise of building teachers' houses, is it achievable in 5 years? Yes, it is achievable in 5 years. If we look at some of our past achievements within the education sector, we had Michael Salter, who came in and built hundreds of schools in Zambia within a period of 3 years. Yeah. So how much more with the teachers' houses? So I think it's a project that can happen as long as the government puts their mind to it and they look for funding exactly to carry out this project. It's very possible for this to happen. Very possible. Clement is telling us, Madam, I remember one time, I'm a truck driver. I was driving from Lusaka to Nakonde, and I gave a lift to a girl between 7 to 8 years, and she was walking 10 kilometers. I almost cried. So you see, when you talk of issues to do with quality education, we're also looking at issues of how children are moving from their homes to access these schools. They're traveling, going, you know, traveling long distances. Clement is telling us he gave a lift to a child, 8 years old, and this child had to walk 10 kilometers to school. Very much for watching, and I hope that we have learned one or two things, and let's keep on interacting in the comment section. If there's anything more that you would want to contribute, if there's any more questions that you would love to ask, let's interact in the comment section. Remember, this is for our country. As you vote on the 13th of August, vote with the future of your children in mind. Vote with your nation in mind. Do not leave these two things, the future of your children and your nation, in mind. But as you go to vote on that day, use your logic. Think about the future. Yeah, don't look at the temporal things that people are trying to lure us with. And don't be cheated that people need a second term or whatever it is for them to do certain things. We have examples of past presidents that sat for only 3 years, but brought about massive, development in the country. If you go into power with a clear mandate, you would definitely deliver. 5 years is too much for you to actually do something. Yeah, you will deliver if you go into power with a clear mandate. So we should be very afraid of leaders that are saying, we just started in the 5 years, you give us another 5 years for us to prove to you. No, we're not an experiment. We're a country that wants to develop. Zambia is over 60 years old. We got our independence in 1964. Some of these things that we're talking about today should not be an issue of discussion. You understand? Yeah. So thank you so much for listening, and do join me. Make sure you share my content, invite as many people as you can to the page, and your contributions are welcome. Thank you, and God bless you.